should be Le'ilui Nishmosoi Shel David Shloime Ben Reb Meir Sheyanuach B'Sholem Al Mishkovei should be a Melech Yosha V'Yamoid L'Garoloi L'Keitze Yamin B'Mehero V'Yomeinu. So last week we started Hilchos Netilas Yadayim. The sugya we will be discussing today is really a fascinating discussion. At least our springboard is Hilchos Netilas Yadayim, but the sugya is such a broad, general sugya, and we will touch upon many, many sources, kechol sheyaspik hazman. So the Ritva has a gewaldige chiddush, and source number one, I did send Rabbi Gazman quite a few sources, too many. We won't be discussing all of them because we have 29 sources, and I need to choose which ones are the most important. So we start off with the Ritva in Chechulin Daf Kuf Vav. So, could we scroll down, and it's the coming words. No, that means, down to the next page. Here we are. V'hanoito liyodov l'achila. ובירך על נטילת ידיים, ואחר כך נמלך ולא יאכל. עכשיו אין בכך כלום. ואין מחייב ונעשה לאכול כדי שלא תהיה ברכוסה לבטלה. ומכיוון שנות לידו, גם לא ברכס הנטילה, שעולה הוא מבורך. והיא שעתה דעתוי אויו לאכול. Person sits in a restaurant and he asks for a meal. He washed before they brought in the bagels. As they bring in the bread, he loses his appetite. They're not well baked. They don't look appealing. And he decides, I can't eat this. Must he force himself to eat? Because otherwise, he has no mitzvah netilas yadayim. There's only a mitzvah netilas yadayim in the past. And if he's not eating, it's a bracha levatollah. The Ritva says, it's not a bracha levatollah. Because when he washed, his intention was to eat. So at the time he had a mitzvah. The fact that he doesn't eat later doesn't invalidate the bracha. It's not a bracha l'torah. V'chein damti lefnei moiri v'hoida u'ledevorayim. So the Ritva had two great rabbeim. He was a Talmud of the Rashba and a Talmud of the Ra'ah. Whenever he writes moiri, it's the Ra'ah, Rabbeinu Aaron Halevi. When he quotes the Rashba, it's usually Rabbeinu Agadol or different titles. So this is a chiddush from the Ritva. Even though at the end he doesn't eat, it's not a bracha levatollah. So let me tell you an amusing story that my father used to tell. So my father and mother, I told you in the past, both grew up in the same town in Hungary, Slovakia, Salish. They come from different backgrounds. My father came from a very Hasidic family, Spinker Hasidim. My mother comes from an Oberlander family, and their name was Abraham. And the Oberlanders were more close to, culturally, to the Yekes in Germany. They were more pedant and neater, as we know. So my mother recalls the first time she actually had a personal encounter with my father. My father was probably a 15 or 16-year-old boy. Knocks on the door, comes in, and the family was sitting around the table, and my father asks my mother's father to let him take my mother's older brother, Nochem Elia. He survived the war. He and my mother were the only two siblings that survived the Holocaust. And my father was same age, more or less, as my uncle Nochem Elia. He passed away just a few years ago. He was an amazing person, lived in Borough Park. And my father asked his parents to let him take him to the yeshiva, and he was traveling to the yeshiva in Ungvar. And my father was always very influential and outgoing, and my mother's brother went to him to yeshiva. He was in yeshiva a day and a half, till he was offered a bowl of soup, and the bocher who acted as a waiter, his finger was dipped into the soup. That was the end of it. So my mother's brother, the Yekke, the Oberlander, couldn't stay in yeshiva because the soup he was offered. So the waiter had his finger in the soup, and so he went to look for another yeshiva. So that's an amusing story. So the person washed to make a bracha, and the waiter didn't wear gloves. He didn't use a napkin. He just grabbed a piece of bread and put it before the person that said on Netilas Yadayim, and he said, I am not going to eat this. Not a bracha levatol. Mogen Geboide. Let me tell you who was the Mogen Geboide, because I like sometimes to give a bit of background. Just, we should know who the Gedolim whose Torah we learn and how amazing and how great they were. Mogen Geboide is Loshen Rabbi, unlike Mogen Avraham. So this Sefer has two mechaberim, two authors, Rabbi Yosef Shol Natan Zalman and his brother-in-law, Rabbi Mordechai Ettinger. So Rabbi Yosef Shol married into the Ettinger family, and his shver was a Mordechai Zev Ettinger. No, not a Mordechai Zev. I think it was Rabbi Yitzchok Meir Ettinger, and his brother-in-law was Rabbi Mordechai Zev. And they wrote many Sforim together. They learned the Chavros and they wrote many Sforim together. When the Mogen Gebodim came out, I think Rabbi Yosef Shol was 19 years old. Maybe he was 20. And his brother-in-law was 3 or 4 years older than him. He is 23 or 24. And the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Sefer almost in every other snif. It has become a classic on Shulchan Aruch HaRachaim. It's just mind-boggling, the gadlus of these young Talmidei Chachamim. One was 1920, the other was slightly older, a few years older. It's not the first sefer they wrote together. The first sefer they wrote together is on Yom Talmud, HaMasechet Baba Kama. So these were real giants of Torah. And the Mogen Gebodim, I don't know whether we could have it on the screen or not, quotes the Ritva. And he says, I don't understand. Why is it not a bracha levatol? If he doesn't eat pas, then that's the Mogen Gebodim. You see Rabbi Yosef Shol and Rabbi Mordechai Zev, they already wrote a sefer before Shehayam al Bava Kama. So I learned this form of Rabbi Yosef Shol as a bocher, and I think that's what gave me inspiration and chesed. Just amazed by his form. So, Mogen Gebodim, Kuf Nun Ches. Kuf Nun Ches is the symbol of Netilas Yadayim. Sif Kuf Gimel writes, I don't understand the Ritva. If he doesn't eat pas, Iglo Milsalim afraid that he had no mitzvah whatsoever to wash. So why wouldn't it be a bracha of a Torah? That is what these two.
If Rav gives us the site, we'll put it up. There's fortunately only the old print.
Okay, sure. Yeah. There is a new one, but the old one is good enough. See,
didn't the Rav once tell us there was a falling out over the machine matzahs? Was that this story, this partnership?
Yeah, yes, there was a fallout. These two brothers-in-law were the best of Chavedim. They wrote many Sforim together, but their ways parted on the controversy of machine matzahs, and they became very bitter, especially Rabbi Yosef Shol. He wrote a sefer, Bittul Meidoah, about machine matzahs. And in that sefer, I don't know how important it is to say this, but I know everybody listening to me is a Talmud Chacham. And Rabbi Yosef Shol writes, Rabbi Shlomo Kruger printed a kuntres, Meidoah lebeis Yisrael, against machine matzahs. Rabbi Yosef Shol was for, he supported the machine, and he wrote a sefer, Bittul Meidoah. Now, Meidoah and Bittul Meidoah are halachic concepts. When you do a kinyan, which you are forced into, you could be Maisa Meidoah. And when a person gives a get, he needs to make a Bittul Meidoah anyway. And Sefer Bittul Meidoah, Rabbi Yosef Shol writes that Mogen Gebodim is actually my Sefer, and I did my brother-in-law a favor. I let him be on the Daf Shar. Well, that is somewhat far-fetched. So there was a big fallout between these two brothers-in-law at the controversy of Mishilatzis. Now, as you notice, there is two Sforim actually, Peresha Orach and Peresha Kotza. Let's freeze this page. Elef Hamogen, Shulte Gebäude. What we are looking for is Elef Hamogen Kuf Nun Ches. We are presently in Kuf Nun Tes. We go back to Kuf Nun Ches, Sif Koten Gimel, not Shulte Gebäude, but Elef Hamogen. Back, a lot back. Another page. Okay, that's Sif Koten Zion. I think probably in the earlier page. One page still back. Sif Koten Vav, back a page. Another page back.
That it right there? From again?
No, that's Sif Koten Vav. We need Sif Koten Gimel.
Oh, okay.
So we need to get back a bit. Let's see where we are. Okay, here we are. Vehine Aritvo. 5 lines into the broad lines. The Kosev Aritvo. B'chulen Daf Kuvov. She'im berech al natilis yadayim. ונמלך, שלא הולך, לא יהיה בברכה לבטלה, או באמס דברות צריכן עיון. המאי לא יהיה לברוכה לבטלה. כיוון דסתם ידיים כשרס, ורק לאכילה, משום סרח תרומה תקנו לבורך וליטול, וכל שאיני אויכל, על מה יחול הברוכה? המאי לא יהיה לבטלה. או לפי דברו, בכל סופק הצורך נטילה, מה רואי הויה לבורך? I slightly disagree with this argument. On a suffix, you can't say a bracha. But in the case of the Ritva, there was no suffix. When he said the bracha, it was kedas uchiden. So anyway, the Magen Gebayim says, I don't understand this one. Let's move forward. Amudei Eish. Who was the Amudei Eish? Next source. The Amudei Eish was one generation after the Shoel HaMeshiv. He passed away Tov Reish Samach Hey Amudei Eish. Rabbi Sol Eisenstein. He was a Hasidic HaRav. I think he was a Sadegera Chassid. And
Pesach, it's there. The second Maramakim. The second Maramakim was the Shalos of Shulas Amudei Eish. Let's scroll it down.
Amudei Eish.
Right there.
Simon Bays. Okay. Let's see the heading. What's the discussion about? Yesh lachkor. B'misho yisamisa shetzorach lavorach alei v'birech. Em yesh biyodei lachzor shelo lases hamitzvah. O neima. De'en biyodei lachzor kedei shelo yeh brocha levetola. So let me tell you a story. About 10 years ago, a Talmud Chacham called me. It was Hanukkah by night. The family was gathered together. He already lit the shamish, and he said the brocha shekedeshono b'mitzvoisa v'tzivono la'ad leknei shel Hanukkah, and suddenly he realizes that his wife is not in the room. And out of covet to his wife, which I very much admire, he didn't want to light Ner Hanukkah when she's not present. It's not nice. And she's just stepped into a neighbor's home to ask for something. I don't know exactly what she needed, but she, left the house for a few minutes. So he blew out the shamish, took a few minutes till his wife entered the room, and he said the brocha again. And he lit Ner Hanukkah. And he called me later, did I do the right thing? I relied on the Ritva. The Ritva says, when you said the brocha, you had the intention of eating, even though later you didn't eat, it's not a brocha levatala. Would it be the same? The Amudei Eish thought it is the same, because a bit further down in this tshuva, he quotes the Ritva, And he deals with the question of a person that was mafresh tumas amaisis, and then he was nishal a chacham moiker eseneda meikore, is it a bracha levatala? But if we scroll down, could we scroll down slightly? So he brings the different opinions. Second column, the column on the left. Nereli raya lezema, mashakosav aritvo b'chadushav lechulin. So his maskona is, it's not a brocha levatola, not a lidei shaila, and not in our case either. So if you wanted to do a mitzvah, and you said a brocha with clear intention to perform the mitzvah, and then you decided, for any reason, you're not doing the mitzvah, it's not a brocha levatola. Same is found in Sdei Chemet. And I humbly disagree. I think if you made a brocha, berachas a mitzvah, and at the end you did not do the mitzvah, it definitely would be a bracha levatola. I want to get up from, okay, it's the first paragraph in Sdei Chemet. I think we need to go back. Yeah, this is it. This is it. Perfect. Mishnot liyoda beberach ונמלך שולח לא היה בברכה לבטלה. מחזיק ברכה בשם הריתווה בחדושה ולחולין. בצורך להבן, המיילה חושב ברכה לבטלה, בצורך מים, ודכל שבשעס הברכה כוונוס בשם מצווה, עבדי אחר כך נמלך, בוס שעס הברכה, אז לינן. והיא הויסו לצורך, שו יודעת או לא יכול. אלא יש לפקבק, נראה שאין הקל מוידם בזה. So the Sdei Chemet argues that the Rashba disagrees with the Ritva. Which Rashba? Very famous Rashba, Shuvas Rashba Chelek Aleph Siman Yud Ches. The Rashba tries to be Kovea Klolim. What are the rules? Which mitzvahs have a Bracha Berachas HaMitzvah, and which mitzvahs do not have Berachas HaMitzvah. So one of the klolim that we find in the Rashba, whenever you are dependent on others in the performance of a mitzvah, you cannot say a bracha, because maybe those others won't cooperate. And therefore your bracha, I don't think we have the Rashba in our source sheet, but I'll just explain to you what the Rashba says. You know, if we could have the Rashba, that's great, but I did not have it in mind. So Chuvas Rashba Chelek Aleph Siman Yud Ches explains, if you are dependent on others and without their cooperation, participation, you can't do the mitzvah, then you can't say a bracha, because maybe those others will not be forthcoming, they won't cooperate. And at the end, you're not going to do the mitzvah, it's going to be a bracha levatala. So the Ritva, the Sdei Chemet argues that Rashba soiser the Ritva, and therefore you cannot rely on the Ritva. Maybe in halacha k'moisei. I humbly want to argue against the Sdei Chemet and the Amudei Eish. No. Ein hanidon domeh lera'aya. If you made a bracha on a mitzvah and you don't do the mitzvah, it's definitely a bracha levatala. You know, there's a Sifin Shulchan Aruch Siman Vov. The source is a Taisus and Brochas Lamed Amud Aleph. Person made a bracha on a fruit, Berchas Anahen, by the pre-weights, and he dropped the fruit, and it fell into the mud, and it's no longer fitting for consumption. It's a bracha levatala, and therefore he needs to say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Eliyah. So what would be the difference between Berchas Anahanan, here we are, Oid Yesh B'Yerushalmi, Heched de Birach HaTur Musa, Tormus, it's a fruit, Lamechle, V'nofel Miyodei, V'shokal Achrine, Boya Brocha, Zimna Achrita, because he didn't have a mind to eat that other fruit. V'parach, Maisnu Ma'amas HaMayim, if you're drinking water from a stream, well, the water that was here a second ago is no longer here, and these are different waters. Perush, the mavorach l'ishtois, והנה אזלה והנה אחרונה, ואין צורך לבוא רק פעם אחרת. ומשני, הוא כה יודעתו אם התחילו לזה, שהוא יודע שילכו להם, אבל בתום הזה לא יודע שיפול בידו. ויאמר, ברוך שם כבוד מחוץ לי יואלם משום דהה וברוכה לבטולה. וכן נוכל לומר על כל ברוכה לבטולה. So it is clear in Tosis, and this is also brought in Shulchan Aruch. You said a bracha on a fruit, and for some reason you don't eat that fruit, it's a bracha lebatola. I think it would be the same by mitzvahs. I don't see any sort to differentiate between berachas mitzvah and berachas hanana. It's different than the ritva. In the case of the ritva, the bracha is al natilas yadayim v'harei not al. He didn't say berachas hamoitzi. He said, "Asher kedeshona b'mitzvah zona tilasadayim v'not al yado." That is why it's not a bracha levatorah. The act on which he said the bracha was performed. The bracha is on atilas yadayim v'harei not al. Lo kedivrei asdei chemed, and therefore the Rashba doesn't contradict the Ritva at all. The Rashba says, how could you make a bracha on a mitzvah if at the end of the day you're not going to do the mitzvah? That's a bracha levatorah. In the case of the Ritva, he did do the mitzvah. He said a bracha on atilas yadayim v'notam yodav. At the end of the day, nisbara that the natila wasn't the natila shel mitzvah, aval notam. And at the time, it wasn't a natila shel mitzvah because if you want to eat bread, you're mechuyev in a tulas yadayim. And therefore, lo kedivrei asdei chemed v'amudei eish. It is not similar to a case in which you said a bracha on a mitzvah, and at the end of the day, you didn't perform the mitzvah. Let's go over to source number 5, which is a Tosis and Brochas Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Tosis Brochas Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Tosis asks, why do we say a bracha only on eating in the sukkah, and we don't say a bracha when we sleep in the sukkah? Brochas Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Tosis answers, how can you say a bracha on shino b'sipa? Maybe you won't fall asleep. And it would be a bracha levatorah. Yud Beis, Yud Aleph Amud Beis.
What are we looking for?
No, we go up. Right in the middle here. Here we are. The im timer. More down. The im timer. Here we are. Ma'aseh sukkah. שצורך לבורך על כל סעודה וסעודה לאישה בסוכה, ויש להם מדרשה נטוירה, שאינו מסייש. אבל אכילה בסוכה יש שעה קבוע. ואם תואמה, מפני מה אין אנו מבורכם לישן בסוכו? Down, 2 lines down. ויש להם את הברוכת האכילה שמבורכם לאישה פוטסו. אינמי, שמה לא ישן. וברוכה לבטול, שהרי הם ביודו לישן כל שעות שירצה. Maybe you won't fall asleep. be a brocha levatala. So if you say a brocha levatala on Chino, and at the end you don't sleep, brocha levatala. So this is similar to the Tosis and Brochas Lamites, the Yerushalmi. You said a brocha on a turmus, fell from your hand, brocha levatala. You said a brocha to sleep in the sukkah, you didn't sleep, brocha levatala. Elior Rabba asks, so how do we say Berchas Hamapil? So before you go to sleep by night, you say Berchas Hamapil. Maybe you won't fall asleep. So Elior Rabba says, A mapel is not a brocha on sleeping. It's not a berachas mitzvah. It's a berachas shevach. It is thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the phenomena, for the gift that we rejuvenate every day in the morning. We sleep at night. We get up fresh in the morning to a new day. And we say once again, Moidani lefanecho. So even if at the end of the day you couldn't fall asleep, it would not be defined as a brocha levatorah. So in the source sheet that I sent over, there's an amusing anecdote from the HaRav. And it's brought in the Sefer Uvdis Mahan Hoges Lebeis Bris. It is so typical of the HaRav. You know, the HaRav was not only a sage, one of the greatest Gedolim of his time. His Yiras Shamayim was legendary. And it was outstanding, even among the great Gedolim and Tzaddikim of his generation. So as the story goes, he never said Amapil. And why didn't he say Berachas Amapil? He was choishish to the opinions. If you said Amapil and you don't fall asleep, it's a bracha levatorah. And the HaRav said, once I said Amapil, and he became so nervous, what is going to happen if he can't fall asleep, that he couldn't fall asleep because of his nerve. Therefore, he stopped saying Amapil. When he didn't say Amapil, he just lay down in bed and fall asleep. But when he did say Amapil, he had nerve. He was so nervous. If I won't fall asleep, Chas v'sholom is going to be a bracha levatorah, and that caused that he couldn't fall asleep. So I once again want to differentiate between the ritva and berachas hananin, berachas mitzvah, berachas mapil. When you say a bracha, either on a fruit, as Tosfos brings from the Yerushalmi, and at the end of the day, you can't eat that fruit because it fell from your hand, fell on the floor. It's a bracha levatorah. We see in Tosfos and brachas, if you say a bracha on sleeping in a sukkah, which is a mitzvah, and you won't perform the mitzvah, it's a bracha levatorah. According to some opinions, berachas hamapel, and you don't fall asleep, it's a bracha levatorah. So the ritva is different. Because in the case of the ritva, the bracha was al netilas yadayim. And he did do netilas yadayim. So even though he didn't eat pass, and if you don't eat bread, you have no mitzvah. But he performed the act, he performed the deed. He did what is a machayev bracha. And therefore, it is not the bracha levatorah. So there's no contradiction whatsoever between harash kol haritva, v'halacha k'divrei haritva, and that is halachic ruling. Do I have anything to compare to the ritva? Maybe shchita, maybe tumas hamaisis. So regarding the first tumas hamaisis is a big machlokes. Does a person have the mitzvah of first tumas hamaisis even if he has no intention to eat the fruit? Or is the first tumas hamaisis a matio? Do you remember last week we spoke a lot about the definitions that go as mitzvah and matio? And I mentioned, we dealt with this question regarding netilas yadayim, but I mentioned regarding tumas hamaisis. Turezov, Yoredea Siman Aleph says, there's a difference between berachas hashchita and berachas hafroshas tumas hamaisis. Regarding tumas hamaisis, you're chayav to be mafresh tumas hamaisis even if you have no intention to eat the fruit. By shchita, every person that has 1 ounce of brains understands that you don't have a mitzvah of shchita unless you really want to eat meat. What would you think about a former guy? He really runs after mitzvahs. Wherever he could chaperein another mitzvah, he does so. So wherever he goes, he has a chana from the spot, the sakam shel shchita. Every bird, every lamb, every goat, every cow that he happens to see, he rushes over. He slaughters the animal. He slaughters the bird. And then he goes on his way. If that person is a tzaddik, he probably would hear a baskoil, like Reb Shimon ben Yehui heard a baskoil after 12 years in the Maila. Lahachlev oilomi yotzoso, tuv lemarascho. Go back into the cave. What are you out here to destroy my world? You're out of your mind. Tsar balachayim dioraisa. Why would you slaughter animals if you don't even need to eat their meat? However, first according to the Taz is different. If it's your produce, it's for you in your field, you have a mitzvah even if you have no intention of eating the pears. Doesn't make sense. Because when is at the end of the day, it's matnas kohun, it's matnas leviyah, it's matnas adiyim. You're doing something positive. You're giving the matanas to a kohen, to a levi, to a oni. Rabbi Akiva Eiger disagrees. And he quotes the Magen Avraham and Semaches. I wonder why neither the Taz nor the Magen Avraham nor Rabbi Akiva Eiger don't quote Rashi and the Rambam. Rashi clearly says in Gittin Mem Zayin, if you don't want to eat the fruit, you don't need to be mafresh. From the Rambam, I was medayik that you do. Anyway, according to Rashi, if you don't eat fruit, you don't have a mitzvah. Person was mafresh, he made the bracha, and at the end of the day, he didn't eat. Does that depend on the ritva? L'chayre, yes. The bracha was on the afrosh, and he was mafresh. At the end of the day, if you don't eat the pri, you had no mitzvah. But I think it's different. And by Baruch Tumas it's not even a chiddush. Because even if at the end of the day, you're not mafresh, you didn't have a chiyuv, but you definitely have a mitzvah. Because after all, you were mafresh to Messiah, you were metakan the teva. And anybody could come along now and eat. These parents were teva, and now they're chun and mitukon. I would say the same even by shchita. Even though by shchita, slaughtering animals, if you don't want to eat their meat, is an aveda. It's not a mitzvah at all, it's an aveda. But after weekend, berachas shchita would not be levatorah. Why not? Because at the end of the day, you are matir basar la'achila. You have no intention to eat, but maybe others will come along and they will. Nevela Eva Menachai was transferred leheta, and there's no way back. It's irrevocable. It's irreversible. Once you're mafresh to Messiah, it's muta. Once you did shchita, it's muta. It's different than a tilis yadayim. Tilis yadayim is personal, only to you, and only for a very limited time. La'achar sheyasech da'ato, he needs to wash again. Tilis yadayim doesn't have for anyone else, only for him. So I think regarding to Messiah, and even regarding shchita, it's not a chiddush at all. Regarding the tilis yadayim, we're dealing with a big chiddush. So do I have any mitzvah that is comparable to Natilas Yadayim? I do. And I think it's the only one. It's not on our source sheet. But not everything could be on the sheet. But listen to me because I think it's fascinating. Mezuzah choives hadar. Person has 10 houses, 10 apartments. He has no chiyuv mezuzah, only if one lives in the house. If you bought a condo for investment. For the time being, no one is in there. You might rent it out to a Jew, you might rent it out to a non-Jew. As long as you don't live there, there's no mitzvah. Mezuzah choives hadar. But the minig is to be kavelim mezuzah before you actually move in. And that is because, great. Mezuzah choives hadar. Let's have a look at Rashi. Fascinating Rashi. Rashi writes, what is the reasoning? Down. Why is mezuzah choives hadar? Lefi shehi mishamresoy. Uksev beischo biyascho. Nechnes v'yotzavo. So Rashi gives two interpretations and explanations. Why is mezuzah chavis adar? One is mezuzah shmira. And if you don't live in the house, you don't need a shmira. The other reasoning is because there's a kosev. Beischa, derech biyascha, nechnis vedar. But the minig is to be kaver the mezuzah before we actually move in, because we want it to be over asiyosan, and we don't want to be one moment in a house without a mezuzah. So after we put all our furniture in, we are ready to move into the house, we put up mezuzah. So what happens? Everything is set and ready. And the person, the simcha gedoyel, is kaveh mezuzah, and he says, suddenly, a mouse scampers about, and his wife sees a mouse in that house, and she says, no way, forget it, I'm not moving in. And he doesn't want to divorce his wife, so after he said the bracha kriyas mezuzah, and he was kaveh mezuzah, they decide, no, they're going to live in another house. Is it a bracha levatol? I think that's mamish the same as the ritva. Because there is no mitzvah mezuzah if you don't live in the house and nobody lives in the house. You have no mitzvah at all. Is that a bracha levatol? After all, the bracha is on kriyas mezuzah, and you put up the mezuzah. I think that is similar to Netilas Yadayim. It's not a chalois. Doesn't change the status of Peres from Tevel to Chulin, from Nevela to Shchuta. It's just a mitzvah. So a matir is a matir as a osul, but there is no issa to live in a house without a mezuzah besides bittul mitzvah mezuzah. Another example would be tefillas haderech. There's no chiyuv of tefillas haderech unless you leave the city a certain distance. Mil. Person said tefillas haderech in the beginning of his journey. He barely left the city. He got a phone call, he must come back home. Just turns around, makes a U-turn, goes back home. What would be the din? Would that be a bracha levatol? If he didn't distance himself into the forest, away from the city, doesn't have a chiyuv. It was his intention. And he did embark on his journey. But the chiyuv proved not to be relevant. Would that be a bracha levatol? So these examples, tefillas haderech, kriyas mezuzah, are somewhat similar to the ritva. Let's talk a bit about Sfira Suwaima. We are in the midst of the days of Sfira. Sheikh Hanoch Paskins, as we all know, if you skip one day, you lost the Sfira, and you cannot go on counting with a bracha. And there's a machlokes in Achronim. Is it a bracha levatol all the days that you did count? Would that be a bracha levatol? The Chiddush compares it to the ritva. Is it the same? Interesting discussion. On one hand, it is, because each and every night of the previous nights, what was the bracha? Ala Sfira. And we counted. We counted a proper Sfira. You skipped one day, you can't go on. But on the previous nights, you performed the act upon which you said a bracha. So even if we maintain that after you skipped one night, lemafreya, it's all one mitzvah, but still, berach al natila, benota, berach al kriyas mezuzah, bekova, berach al sfira, besofa. However, one might argue, no, it needs to be a consecutive sfira of 49 days to permit saying a bracha. But it's more mistava, we say a bracha every night. So the bracha we say tonight is not on tomorrow, not on the day after tomorrow, not on next week. The bracha we say tonight is on the sphere that we count tonight. V'harei Safar. So my opinion would be, according to the Ritva, it would not be a bracha levatola lemafreya. So this Ritva is a big yesod. We started off with some achronim that don't even understand the Ritva, and they say, why wouldn't it be a bracha levatola? And we explained, no, because at the time, he had a chiyuv of Netilas Yadayim. He intended to eat pas. And that's his mitzvah. Yesh his topic, if at the end he doesn't eat bread, is the mitzvah bottle of mafreya? Only the brocha is not a brocha levatolo? Or we say, yes, our mitzvah. Because at the time that it was noit liyodov, it was mechuyev to do so. So even at the end of the day, he decided not to eat pas. But the mitzvah is not botla mafreya. So I don't have a definitive opinion about this question. My leaning is, Igron Milk said mafreya that he was not makayim a mitzvah, but the brocha is not a brocha levatol, because that's the chiddush of the mitzvah. The brocha is dependent on the circumstances in real time when you said that brocha. Was it a chiyuv or not? Would Berachas Eresin be similar? No. Berachas Eresin is similar to Shchita, and of course, it's nice because it's a chalois. It's a chalois, doesn't go back. You change the status. Now she is your wife. Eresin is a mitzvah. True. If you don't want to marry her, you had no mitzvah to engage her. The mitzvah of Eresin is if you want to marry a woman. But I think regarding Eresin, everybody would agree it's not a bracha of the Torah because it's a chalois. And that is exactly my point regarding Rosh Hashanah Shchita. Eresin is not legamre to be the Shchita because Shchita, I said, is relevant to everyone. So is the Rosh Hashanah, not Eresin. But the truth is, Eresin is also relevant to everyone. She's an arusa to everyone. She is your wife, and osala kuli alme kehegdish. So today's shiur is full of nuances, dakus, svaras amukos, svaras in which we could study weeks. Ve'ein behem achroa gemuro. So I'm just sharing with you Netias Libi, uvenesed de libo. It's not black and white, but to me, the svaras are very clear svaras. Arguable. Not everybody needs to agree with me, but I try to structure this shir in a very special way. Comparing other sugyas to the Ritva. So what did we have? Let's just summarize. Rosh Hashanah, Shchita, Erosin. I think they're slightly different than the Ritva. Kriyas mezuzah, it's not a chalais. But after all, as long as the mezuzah is on the door, anybody can move in. Hamapil, it's not berachas mitzvah. So some achronim like the HaRav feel that hamapil b'chal, it's not a bracha levatala. Hamapil is a phenomenon. It's on the phenomena of sleep, on the gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us of sleep. Whether you fall asleep or not, it's not relevant. But the briskarov was chayshish. So I find this fascinating.
Can I take the Rav back to the Hanukkah story for a moment?
Yes. So in my opinion, the Hanukkah story was a bracha levatala, but I don't know why he needed to make another bracha. I think he could just wait a few minutes for his wife to come into the room.
That's the question.
Time in itself is not a hefsek. Even if he waits 5 minutes, it's not a hefsek. As long as he doesn't talk and he doesn't leave the house, there's no shini mokum, there's no hefsek. I told him you just needed to wait for your wife to step back into the room. But maybe he felt it was offensive even that he said a bracha and he didn't realize she's not present. And that is why he instinctively, put out the Shabbos and he said another bracha. But in my opinion, that's a bracha levatol, just like the Turmus, Toises and brachas, and just like the bracha lishon besukah, Toises says, if you don't fall asleep, bracha levatol. That's the story of Hanukkah. Shlomo, what did you want to suggest about Hanukkah?
So what the question was, can he have waited? And the Rav answered.
I don't hear you. I hear you very quietly.
So I think the question was, can he make bracha and then wait if the Elam is not there, his family's not there? It's not a hefsek.
Yeah, I definitely think that is exactly what I just said. He made two mistakes. If he would just wait for his wife to come into the room, that wouldn't be defined as a hefsek. But probably it's not what he wanted to do, because he felt that his wife would be hurt that he said the bracha and he didn't notice that she isn't around. So I hope you found this shir interesting. And if some of you are muted, I don't hear you.
Okay, so Yesh Koyach.